Hello and welcome to yet another edition of the Green 19 podcast. I'm Dominique Yates checking in from Green Bay, Wisconsin. I have our two island boys, if you will, Pete Dougherty and Ryan Wood. And Ryan, great scenery, by the way. I guess that was your way of trying to show off. So how's Florida going, guys? Starting with you, Ryan. How is it?
You know, Dominique, there's sometimes in life you just can't complain. Palm trees behind me right now. I'm in shorts on April 1st, and it's not an April Fool's joke. Feel pretty good. How are you? How's Wisconsin?
Oh, it snowed yesterday, and I covered baseball. So, yeah, I'm done talking about it. Pete, how are you doing?
Doing well. Been a busy couple days here. Lots of NFL news to talk about.
Yes, and we can definitely jump into it because, the past couple of days, you guys have a lot of content, and it's out on the Packers News for fans to read and check out from the NFL owners' meetings in Palm Beach, Florida. You guys talked to Packers GM Brian Gutekunst on Monday, head coach Matt LaFleur on this Tuesday. So want to huddle everybody up, and we can just kind of break down some of the observations that you guys have gathered. And I guess we can start with, before we go from like the past 2 days and what everyone said, was there anything in particular, and I can start with you, Pete, that just really jumped out at you that, you really wanted to kind of think about, you can take it from there?
We came in with, we had story ideas we were each doing and all that. So that was what you're thinking mostly about. But I think we were both struck by, basically the biggest thing going at this owners meetings from a league-wide perspective was the tush push. It was kind of comical to be sitting in the press conference, and there's Rich McKay, a venerated guy who's been working in the league for decades, and to hear the words tush push come out of his mouth. I mean, you probably had to be there to really laugh at it, but it was just kind of comical. But that was the biggest thing going. Especially today with Matt LaFleur sitting at one table talking about it. The Packers were obviously the ones who created the proposal. And, 10 or 15 yards away is Nick Sirianni at a different table, and he's obviously the person arguing strongest against banning it. So it was a big thing, and it's been tabled. And Mark Murphy this afternoon made it sound like he thinks there's a decent chance it'll eventually pass, but he made it sound like it would be more in the form of no pushing allowed at any time of a ball carrier and not just banning the tush.
Yeah, it was very fascinating to hear the comments from LaFleur about it. We talked about it being just like a rugby style play, not a football play, and it was just really interesting to hear those type of comments. But even in the back of my head, when I heard him talking about it, I did laugh. I was like, well, they did run one with Tucker Kraft and all, but I do think it was interesting, just their comments and their thoughts on it. And maybe we can touch on a little bit more, and Ryan, you can have some opinions on it as well. But for you, were there any things that, any observation or something that really jumped out at you?
There's a lot of Packer stuff to get to, but without a doubt, being here these past 2 days, the tush-push conversation, debate has been inescapable. If you're here, you hear about it. I said this yesterday, but all things considered, this is always an extremely important news gathering and information gathering event. It's our only chance. It's our first time since the season, since Philadelphia, that we've talked about before. Right, so there's a lot going on from a Packers standpoint here. But there wasn't that big thing like the past few years. There's no Aaron Rodgers trade discussions. There's no trading Devontae Adams. There's no just releasing Aaron Jones. So it was interesting that without any of that happening, you land here in Southeast Florida. And wouldn't you know, the Packers are in the hailstorm again. They're in the midst of the hot topic pressing issue that you can't escape because of their proposal. I think, first of all, just everyone's going to have their own opinion on this, right? I think it's a football play because when I see the play, I see a football. I don't see a rugby ball. It's on a football field with football players with a football. I also think that if you're anyone in the league, not the Philadelphia Eagles, you're smart to want to get it out of the league, okay? And say what you want about injury risk certainly there's a compelling argument to be made, even though the data right now does not support it. Everyone associated with the Packers, Mark Murphy, Brian Gutekunst, Matt LaFleur, all said the same thing. You want to be proactive, they're not reactive. Okay. But if you're not the Philadelphia Eagles, if you are not the one team that has mastered and frankly perfected this play and is better designed with the strength of Jalen Hurts' legs, the dominance of their offensive line to run it better than anyone else, if you're not that team, you're smart to not want it in the game because then you don't have to defend it. So I don't know why anyone not the Philadelphia Eagles would want this play in the game, and ultimately I would expect that you're going to see some adaptations. Mark Murphy talked about going back to what the rule was pre-2005 when you couldn't push the ball carrier. I think that eventually that's probably where this is headed.
Yeah, and I do want to spend some time talking more about LaFleur since, you guys are on video and talk from Gutekunst. Obviously, we can rehash some of that a little bit later, but I do want to just have some of them takeaways from LaFleur. I mean, he touched on everything from just playoffs and trying to get to that next step, coaching staff changes, and obviously with that tush push. But Pete, I'll take it with you and just, I guess, some of that playoff stuff in terms of trying to reach Super Bowls and just kind of like that next step for this team. I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but the theme I get for the most part with LaFleur, like obviously they looked at their mistakes, but it seems like they still feel confident that like what they have in place, I don't know, is good enough to get to that next step. Do you kind of sense that, or do they, feel like they need to add?
Yeah, I they still need to add some things. I've never heard them not be optimistic about the upcoming season at the owners' meetings. So, I was struck more by some of the little things, seemingly little things. Like, I really wondered what they were going to do with Jordan Morgan this year. Because, would they play him at right guard and have him compete with Sean Ryan for a starting job? Or would they try him out at tackle to see if he could play that position? It sounds like it's going to be more of the latter, and they're going to give him a shot to compete with Rasheed Walker for the left tackle job. And this has repercussions for down the road because if they determine that Morgan can play left tackle and is a starting left tackle in this league, even if, let's just say they have Walker start ahead of him this year, they can let Walker walk in free agency next year. But if they think Morgan's not a left tackle, then they got to think about extending Walker's contract either during or after the season. So I think that'll be really. That'll be a big thing. Though I think it's a big decision, and it'll be a big thing to watch when training camp gets going.
Yeah. Ryan, for you, as far as with the offense, since, of course, today you told Matt LaFleur he needs to give up play calling duties. Is that correct? No, I'm just kidding. but in all seriousness, though, just what were your takeaways from him when he talked about just the passing game and just the offense as he views it and, what they need to kind of clean up heading into 2025?
What's interesting about the joke about giving up the play calling that he had today is, Monday night of the owners' meeting, there's a reception, and it's very laid back. It's a lot of media, it's everyone in the league. I was able to spend a little bit of time with Matt LaFleur, and I actually one of the things I told him was, it's such a long season, and this is true. I've always appreciated his candor and even more his banter at the podium. So when those things happen, it's fun for me. It breaks up the monotony of what is otherwise. It's not just a long season; it's a long year. Right? It's April 1st, and here we are talking Packers in Florida. So that was a fun moment. But I think when you look at this offense, the Packers are doubling down on what was the year of the running back. And bringing in Aaron Banks and spending a lot of money there instead of going after a DK Metcalf receiver and leaving for this point, I'm sure that they're going to have to draft at least one receiver, but leaving that position, frankly, untouched because Mecole Hardman is going to make much more of an impact as a return specialist than a receiver. What you're seeing is they spent a lot of money to double down on the run game, a run game that in 2024 for them, but also throughout the league. I mean, the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl because of Saquon Barkley. It wasn't so much Jalen Hurts. It was Saquon Barkley and that offensive line. You're seeing that last year winning was synonymous with running the ball and vice versa, and with 2 interior blockers and Aaron Banks and Elton Jenkins that are paid top of the market money, and a third on the way in Zach Tom, who will get extended at some point. Maybe Rasheed Walker becomes a fourth. We'll see what happens, because that's going to be that's a tall order for Jordan Morgan to beat out Rasheed Walker for that left tackle job. Financially, it makes sense because Jordan Morgan's got a lot more years left on that rookie deal than Rasheed Walker. Rasheed Walker is a fine offensive left tackle, and ultimately what matters is you got to protect Jordan Love's blind side. So I'm dubious on how that's going to go. But they've got linemen paid top of the market. They got Josh Jacobs, obviously. They are designed not, and Brian Gutekunst wouldn't go as far to say that the passing game is going to be in a complementary role or a background role, but they are designed to be a run-dominant, run-oriented team with that line, with that tailback. The question is, to me, is 2024 the start of a new era of offensive football, or is it more of a fad? Was it a one-year type thing? Because this is still a passing league. Will the fact that the receiver position that's got a lot of injuries, a lot of unproven talent, hasn't really been upgraded yet, and at most, even if through the draft, Jordan Love's going to be surrounded by a lot of young guys, young pass catchers again. Is doubling down the right call on the run game or not? I think that's going to be very fascinating once the season comes. But that's essentially, you follow the money. That's what they've done for this offense.
Yeah, so I guess thinking with the trenches, and I'll go with you, Pete, going back to Monday when Gutekunst was talking about just the pass rushers and what's in place. I guess what were your takeaways and your impressions of that? And I know it's kind of interesting because, at least from the fan perspective, they're all quick to just be done with a Lucas Van Ness or a guy like that. But I mean, they're still in their contracts, and you have to pay these guys. You can't just throw in the towel after a couple of years where it didn't work out. But for you, Pete, just what were some of your takeaways on when they looked at the pass rush and maybe some other pieces, even with the defense?
Yeah, Gutekunst basically confirmed, kind of the takeaway that you have as an outsider, that they didn't sign a pass rusher and they didn't do anything to acquire a receiver who would be, maybe their number one or their best guy. And the reason was the free agent market was thin, and there's just more players there, and the draft is strong on the defensive line at least. And he basically confirmed that when he basically said you can't force it in free agency. You can't create something that's not there, was basically the phrase that he used. So that was a big takeaway, was that was his thinking. Because, when they had money, and when they've had money in the past, when he's had money in the past, he spent it when they've had money in cap room. So it made sense that it was more, he just didn't like what was available. But now it's really on him. There might be a lot of good prospects on the defensive line in this draft, but some of those guys are going to be good and some are going to bomb out. And it's on him now to draft both an inside and outside guy who might end up being players.
For you, Ryan, I'll give you just similar opportunity. Just were there any thoughts that you had when they kind of had the pass rush comments? Because I saw you did have a story as well.
Yeah, before we get to Pete, with what we know now and how we've seen the offseason unfold, would you still have traded and paid DK Metcalf?
Yeah.
I would too.
It's we're just talking to some people we bumped into around the league from here. It sounds like for an AFC team, the cost was going to be a second round pick. For an NFC team, it was going to be a second plus. You maybe got a flip-flop, a 4 and a 5 or something like that. But as long as you get to at least have a pick, even if you lose a round, I think it would have been worth it. I just looked up his contract finally came in. On paper, the total is average is $33 million, but that's that BS new money thing. The actual money is over the next 3 years, he's going to average $28 million. Still a lot of money. The only thing I can conclude is, the guy is really temperamental. And Gutekunst knows John Schneider really well, the Seahawks GM. So he probably, through the last couple of years, probably has a pretty good feel for, some of the downside of having Metcalf in your locker room. And my guess is, Gutekunst just decided the cost of the draft picks plus the big contract was too risky with this guy for being a tough guy to deal with. He might end up being a really tough guy to deal with. So they didn't do it. But the guy is a rare talent, and they have, their receivers are good and there's skill and talent there, but they don't have anybody who has a dominant physical trait. Watson's the closest, and he's hurt, and he may not do much of anything. He won't be back till November, and who knows, how he'll be right when he gets back. Metcalf would have brought something they just don't have. So I'd have done it, but now they have that second round pick, so they got to make. He's got a chance to make good use of it. He could either use it to draft a receiver or a defensive lineman. He could really help his team if he picks the right guy. I could see why he didn't do it, but I'd have done it.
The one thing that I do understand is that usually when you're dealing with someone who has a temperamental personality and can be tough to deal with, that doesn't all of a sudden get better when you pay the guy.
Yeah, no, you pay him.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So I get that. But everything you just said, rare talent, I think I agree. And there's some people that might think differently about DK Metcalf. The guy's never had fewer than 900 yards a season. He's played with fine quarterbacks. He hasn't played with Jordan Love or someone with Jordan Love's arm talent. I would have too. What we've seen, though, and this goes back to the earlier point, what we've seen, though, is instead of investing in that receiver position, they're investing in the run game. And that's how Brian Gutekunst has chosen to allocate his resources. The good thing is that time will tell. We'll know eventually whether that was a wise decision or a huge missed opportunity. But yeah, I'm with you, Pete. I would have as well. As far as what you asked, Brian Gutekunst said he didn't feel like the need to go chase pass rushers. That's another thing. He's left himself with a lot of work to do in the draft. He's going to have a lot of picks to do it like usual, but they've got to get better at the pass rush. I understand what Brian Gutekunst is coming from, and he believes strongly that there is a necessity and a real chance to have internal improvement there. That and he tipped how he felt about what happened with the pass rush last year, and Matt LaFleur did as well when they let Jason Reverovich, the defensive line coach, go. That's an indictment of the coaching, the positional leadership, not getting the most out of the players on the field. They believe there's more production to be gotten from the guys that they currently have. And ultimately, this is a business. Dollars and cents matter. And the determination of, okay, would you rather have Lucas Van Ness, Kingsley and Igbare on rookie contracts and Brenton Cox Jr. for even cheaper than that? Or would you rather spend $12.6 million on a chance that Joey Bosa can stay healthy? That's what Joey Bosa got in Buffalo. Would you rather spend $14 million on the chance that Hassan Reddick can have a bounce back season? That's what he got in Tampa Bay. The idea that there's not a lot of potential production difference between a Reddick, a Bosa, and the three that the Packers currently have on their roster on cheap deals, I can understand that. The thing is, though, don't go chasing pass rush. Don't overpay. But you still got to get better than that. And the draft is going to be awfully important now. Not just because it's in Green Bay and everyone's been telling you, hey, they want the draft picks. It's going to be the show. No, from a football standpoint, getting better at pass rusher and getting better at receiver is a mandate when it comes to the draft.
It's an interesting headline right there. Don't go chasing pass rushers. So I like that. That'll be the takeaway from Ryan's. Just takeaways. But for you, I want to go back to Monday with Gutekunst, and I'll start with you, Pete. I guess at this point, we're almost 20 minutes in. We haven't brought up Jair Alexander. As far as what Gutekunst said with that, I mean, it's not like he's given a whole lot of information, but just, what are the themes and the messages of, obviously it seems likely that Jair will not be a Packer in 2025, but, I guess what are your thoughts on what was said?
Yeah, I still find it really, really, really hard to believe that he's back. And I think Ryan and I talked about it each other after talking about it. I mean, and as Ryan wrote, he's basically is hoping to get something for it. I mean, the guy's still young enough where he can play, but $17.5 million this year for a guy who's missed half the games over the last 4 years. And there's obviously some strain between him and the organization. The issues that have happened, including naming himself a captain on the field at Carolina a couple of years ago. So I just find it really hard to believe he'll be back. I'm skeptical they'll be able to get anything from him because other teams know his injury history, and they're not going to want to pay $17.5 million this year and $19.5 million next year for a guy who's missed all these games. Knowing that he's missed all these games the last 4 years. So I'm sure a lot of teams just think, well, they're eventually going to cut him, and then we can try to sign him then. You never know. I could be dead wrong, and maybe they'll get a 6 or a 7 for him. In the next few weeks or before the draft. But I'm skeptical. I still think it's probably going to end up with them cutting him. But I find it really hard to believe that he'll be playing.
Yeah, Ryan, I guess, do you get any sense from what Gutekunst said on when maybe I guess people might have a sense of what is next for Jair? Because, you got the draft coming, then you'll have workouts. You'll just have a lot of things where the team will start to come back together. I just feel like it would be awkward if he was, there during workouts or something along those lines.
It would be. The bottom line is they don't want to offload Jair Alexander from nothing. They want something back. And you can understand why. He's been their top cornerback for 7 seasons. He is the first player Brian Gutekunst ever drafted as the GM of the Green Bay Packers. It's a guy that they believed in enough at one point to make him the highest paid corner in the league. But when every other team knows that you're not going to keep him, it's tough to get anything from any other team. So at some point, that's got to come to a head. And I think for Brian Gutekunst, it's just going to test, okay, you don't want to offload Jair Alexander for nothing. How strongly do you feel that way? Because at some point, that's going to come to a head. I don't know. I don't know what happens if he's still on the roster in a couple of weeks. That's a weird situation. So stay tuned.
Yeah, Dominique, you brought up a good point there. I don't know the exact date the off-season program starts. It's usually April 15th, somewhere to the 21st, somewhere there is the first week of it. I can't imagine that they'll want him showing up for that because if he gets hurt for it, then they're on the hook for 17. Let's say he tore his ACL while working out. They're on the hook for $17.5 million. Now they could work out an agreement where he doesn't come, but if you're Alexander, you want this resolved. You want to be with your new team. So he'd just say, "No, I'm coming," and then they'd have to make a decision. So it does make sense that something would happen before the off-season program kicks in. I don't, like I said, I don't know the exact date. It's within a couple of weeks. So I guess my inclination is to guess that it'll happen sometime one way or another next 2 weeks. Could be wrong there too, also, but that would be my best guess.
I think that's the deadline. I think that's got to be the deadline. That's when it comes to a head. Because I can't envision a world where I can't envision that world.
Yeah.
It makes all the sense in the world, right? You invested a lot of money into this guy. You hope you would get something out of it in return if you're going to move on from him. But, the injuries, that's what happens. That's the name of the game in football. I guess as we wrap it up, there's just a couple of other things that I just made notes of, and this was just bouncing off what, you guys wrote about when Gutekunst talked about guys like Brandon McManus and McCole Hardman and Isaiah McDuffie. We can kind of quick hitters on all 3 of those, but I'll start with you, Pete. McDuffie was another one of those toss-ups for me in terms of, what they wanted to do when they looked at linebackers, because we talked about, Tyron Hopper, maybe he was going to get a little bit more and see what happens with Quay Walker and the others that might take another step. But it seems pretty clear that this coaching staff loves this guy. Just what were your feelings on just McDuffie coming back?
Yeah, I thought they would re-sign either him or Eric Wilson to have a 4th linebacker. And my guess was, I was thinking they probably, even though Wilson's old now, I think he's 30 or he's going to be 30 this year sometime. My guess was it was going to be him because he'd probably be, minimum salary guy. But they signed McDuffie and they got him for basically $8 million for over 2 years, so $4 million a year. That's a pretty good salary for number 3, possibly number 4 linebacker if Hopper outplays him in training camp. But it does tell you that they really like him, that they do think, Gutekunst talked about that depth at linebacker is probably more important. than he thought it would have been a year ago at this time because they played more actual 4-3 than he would have guessed. And injuries are, the linebackers are like the running backs in the defense as far as injuries go. Those guys get beaten up. So it surprised me a little bit, but $4 million is not that much, so I see why they did it. And it is, it's one of their most talented positions now, top to bottom.
Yeah. For you, Ryan, obviously, you just kind of touched earlier about Hardman being used for special teams, even more so than receiver. But of those guys we talked about, McManus, McDuffie, anything that you wanted to touch on that you just kind of took away from Monday?
Yeah, Mecole Hardman has 27 catches the last 2 years. He's a return specialist. Brandon McManus had to be about the easiest decision. I even said this to Brian Gutekunst. Had to be about the easiest decision he's made in a while, right? I was thinking about the decisions he's made the past few off seasons. Do you release Aaron Jones and sign Josh Jacobs? Make that kind of change? Aaron Rodgers, I'm upset there. Trading Devontae Adams? Re-signing Brandon McManus was a no-brainer, and he got it done. And Brian Gutekunst said, yeah, with the season that they had last year at the kicking position, how he stabilized it, it was a very easy call. So given what this team is expected to be, which is another playoff contender, more Super Bowl aspirations, they absolutely could not go into this season with kicker in flux. And so it was a no-brainer decision. They got it done. And you would expect Brandon McManus to be what he was last year, which is the person that stabilized a really up-in-the-air kicking situation for the Packers since moving off of Mason Crosby.
Yeah. I guess as we wrap it up, though, for you guys, any closing words, final thoughts, something that, we didn't touch on that you wanted to spotlight, anything at all? And other news.
Go ahead. It's just
Go ahead.
A really small thing. But Rick Ryan was talking about Hardman, and it's not even, we all know already, he may not even make the roster. But something came across today that made me wonder, so LaFleur was talking about Jaden Reed, and Reed didn't have a good season last year. At least some of us thought he was going to have. And he did have several small leg injuries that affected him all season. LaFleur mentioned almost in passing about the jet sweep runs, the runs that they did with this guy. Those are hard tackles, hard shots those guys are taking, just like running back would. And they try to take some of that off him. And it did make me wonder if they see Hardman as a guy who can play in the slot to run jet sweeps and fake jet sweeps and throw quick screens too. And though Reed is more of a slot receiver, he can play on the outside. So I wonder if, assuming Hardman does end up making the team, if there'll be a few snaps every game where both of those guys in the field and Hardman's the one in the slot and they run a jet motion and maybe once a game get the ball on a jet sweep. It's a very small thing, but it just kind of popped up in my mind today.
Yeah. I mean, he's got the speed. He's had some big moments in games, as we know. So, we'll see what happens. But, hey, you get him in space. It'll be interesting to see what that speed would be like. So, guys, appreciate it. So, what's next? You about to grab some pina coladas and go to the pool or something?
I'd just like to mention that, I've been sitting out here in the Florida sun for about a half hour now, and I'm sweating. I mean, it's coming down the face. And I'm not mad about it. It's kind of nice. It's kind of nice to sweat. So I just want to throw that out there. The thing that's been in my head a couple times over the past couple days is how little we've talked about Jordan Love. I mean, Brian Gutekunst, Matt LaFleur, we didn't need to barely ask anything about Jordan Love. Pete asked today to Matt LaFleur whether or not Jordan Love got a knee procedure after the season, and Matt LaFleur said no. He asked if the knee affected him, but really, like going back the past couple of years at this position for this team, it was ad nauseum quarterback question. Mark Murphy talked today, wasn't asked about Jordan Love, but just kind of felt like bringing up how impressed he was with how Jordan Love gutted through that injury this past year. It really signals how stable that position has become. Not that Jordan Love has arrived. He needs to be better, but we know where he needs to be better, right? We also know that he's supremely talented and that he's a guy that they can go win with. So it's just, we've talked about so many things, really just a lot of different topics, push on down this week. Quarterback's been so far down the list. It's kind of, it's a departure from the past couple of years at this time.
I think it's simple. Jordan Love, he's going to be fine. He just has to get some help. I think that's the key for this whole offense. Everyone has to do their part. And I mean, LaFleur said that many times. It's on the receivers, it's on the play calling, it's on the O-line. So, I mean, that's the name of the game. But it is interesting to think about that with Love, because there's not much talk about him. But, I mean, there's other areas with this Packers team that we'll see what happens, especially with the draft and so much more coming up very soon. It's hard to believe it is April. And it's April Fool's Day, I guess, as well. And it is officially draft month. So I guess you guys get ready, but enjoy the rest of Florida, too. So enjoy those palm trees.
Going to hit some beach tomorrow.
Sounds good. So, Pete, you going like scuba diving or something out there today?
No, but I'm going golfing later in the week, so.
I like it. Y'all have a good time and enjoy that weather for me, and just try to bring it back to Wisconsin, because I need a little bit of that. So, guys, thanks for all the work that you do, and we'll see you when you get back in Wisconsin. And everyone, thank you for checking out the Green 19 podcast. For Pete Dougherty, Ryan Wood, I'm Dominique Yates.